What was in their National Policy Forum document and what was in their manifesto on renters reform was not quite the same thing. It was made clear to me that they have not backtracked on renters' rights. We can expect what they've said, which is the immediate end of Section 21 evictions, which is really, really good. Just ban them. I just don't think we should be a country that means if you live somewhere that's not well connected or where there is no affordable housing, your life chances are so much worse. There is a desperate need to be able to get around this country and also for people to be able to live in places that they want to live. It shouldn't be this hard. I have questions still about how they're going to do certain things. I have questions about renters reform as well and exactly how far they're planning to go. So I suppose that's a long answer to your question, Ava, which is, can they actually build the homes?
Well, I asked you a very broad question, didn't I? I think the Matthew Pennycook question is really interesting because so I've heard that he is going to have a ministerial role.
Yeah, same.
But he will have a special advisor, which suggests that he will have a more promoted role. So he will basically be almost like a de facto Secretary of State. He just won't sit at the cabinet table. But I mean, from that conversation that you had with him, do you think that he's the man to deliver?
No question. Matt is incredible. He regularly corrects me on renters reform, levelling up. He is so in the detail. I don't think he'd be offended at me calling him a technocrat. He really is one, but in the best possible way. I think if there was anyone who was going to oversee how we get out of the housing crisis, you want someone who has read every single policy document and genuinely cares about the wording of each clause, and that is Matt Pennycook. So if he is housing minister, I'd actually love to see him as Secretary of State. I think he's an incredibly capable politician. I think he could do great things. I think that would be very, very good for the country. But what I would say, and I think this is a really important point, Labour's policies are not a million miles away from where Michael Gove was. I've become such a Michael Gove apologist in recent weeks, but he wanted to do a lot of the things that Labour are proposing, and of course he couldn't get them past his backbenchers. Labour will be able to get them past their own party. Planning reform, renters reform, leasehold reform.
But will they though? Because you've still got the issue at core, which is, as you said, local councillors, local residents who aren't happy with the builds. I mean, do you think there will be some backbenchers who will rebel on account of, well, I guess they've got 5 years now to keep their seat, so they won't be panicking as much, will they?
I think that's it. They won't be as worried because it will feel less volatile. I think also a lot of those constituencies are less NIMBY than you might think. I think that certain Conservative backbenchers were more NIMBY maybe than their constituents were. Theresa Villiers.
Because there was a development that I went down to in Surrey. It was near a place called Cobham, and it was a huge build that they were attempting to put through there. And I was speaking to local residents because they were picketing it. I was asking, well, why don't you want it? And they were like, well, there won't be a doctor's surgery and there won't be an extra school. So do you think that Labour have accounted for providing the extra public services alongside the housing?
I think this is something that Cobham, by the way, is quite near where my mum lives, and it's such a posh area. I'm not surprised that there are people with the time to picket new homes. Love that for them. I'm just like, at this point in time, how could you possibly be picketing a development of new homes in an area where there are no young people? I'm not surprised, but like, good luck to those guys. I've seen it all, honestly. I'm like, so you don't care if your children have anywhere to live? Great, love that for you.
But they'll have housing.
True.
Where that will be is yet to be decided.
So Labour haven't said where the new towns are going to be, and I think that is really important. But to a point about infrastructure, I think they have said that when there are new homes, they will make sure there is the infrastructure to support them. And I'm really encouraged that they're talking about development corporations, because there are some planning decisions. Like my mission is to get people to care about planning policy. It's like the least sexy bit of policy. It's not even it doesn't seem controversial, but it upsets everyone, but you cannot fix the housing crisis if you don't fix planning. And we do need to have some kind of cross-constituency, slightly more national overview of where things go. So like if we're putting homes here, what does that mean for the train capacity of these different stations that might be in different constituencies? You have to be able to work across borders like that. I think development corporations are a really good way of doing it. I was in Cornwall recently, and there was a brilliant development there called Langgarth Garden Village, which will be ready in a couple of years. And they're building GPs, surgeries, rugby pitches, football pitches, primary schools, and a whole new road as part of a development of 8,000 homes.
That seems something you should be doing.
Yeah, you'd think so, right? But that's not what we've been doing. And a problem that Labour are going to have is developers. So I learned something that absolutely blew my mind recently, which is that developers actually don't want infrastructure around their housing developments.
Right.
They own the land often. So you know if you go to one of those new build estates, and it's beautiful and there's some nice roads in the middle, but it's kind of like in the middle of some fields, and then it connects to the main road, and that's it. There's loads in Oxfordshire, and where my sister lives actually in Kent. And I was looking into it, like, why would you not build stuff around it? So we're just to plonk these homes in the middle of a field because developers want to own the access.
Right.
But this is where the compulsory purchase comes in. So it remains to be seen how Labour will use it. But in theory, you could compulsory purchase land for infrastructure to support the new housing.
Gosh. But they've done a lot of that, haven't they? For building HS2, they did a lot of that. And then they've sold it back below market value.
Yeah.
I mean, that feels like a big mistake. Could you not have, I mean, I'm being quite idealist here, but, you know, along where it should have been, could you not have started building there?
I don't know if you're being idealistic. I think that's quite pragmatic. Like I was with a friend the other day, and her parents actually had to sell their home because of HS2 at a loss. And then obviously HS2 hasn't happened. They're now renting their home from the government essentially, and it was all for nothing.
Gosh.
And there are so many people like that. And there's this infrastructure that's half finished. Why not put the new towns along those routes and bring back HS2, HS3, or whatever we're going to call it? I think that would be very smart. I was in Bradford last week. Every train I got was delayed. There is a desperate need to be able to get around this country, and also for people to be able to live in places that they want to live. It shouldn't be this hard.
I found that with Stoke when I went there the other week, because I was trying to go I was trying to go anywhere around the area that wasn't Stoke, and I was taking 40-minute cabs. And I was thinking, well, you can't live in any of these towns that are meant to be vibrant market towns if you don't have a car.
Yeah.
Because you're coming into Stoke and then you're completely abandoned.
Yeah.
And there's no point in having a bus there, because who can get a 40-minute bus with traffic that's an hour every day?
It's actually proper galaxy brain stuff. Like the fact that you can't get a direct train to Bradford, to Grimsby, blows my mind.
Yeah, mine too, actually. Or if you want to go anywhere like, Rochdale, you have to go up to Manchester.
And then change.
Yeah, but it's not a simple change. You've got to walk across town.
To the other station. Manchester Victoria.
Yes, I couldn't believe it. Oh God, I'm sounding really south now, aren't I?
Well, but I think, like, yeah, it makes us sound like we live in the south, but it's not that easy to get around the south either.
Yeah.
I was in Eastbourne at the weekend, and I wanted to come back from a different station, and that involved a change and a long walk. And it was fucking expensive. It's wild. Like my train back from Manchester cost my employer like £75, and it was delayed. And I just put in my delay repay thing. I'm getting 30 quid back.
Yeah,
that's 50 quid down the drain.
Yeah,
and also that is a lot of money. That's a lot of money that people don't have.
Absolutely. And also, you know, you might have sacrificed a meeting that you couldn't get to, which might have been like the reason you've gone.
Or childcare. If you were trying to get home, you've got to pay your childcare more. I just don't think that we should be a country that means if you live somewhere that's not well connected or where there is no affordable housing, your life chances are so much worse than if you live in the southeast. I mean, like, let's be real.
Maybe you are being idealist.
Maybe I am, yes. But there are problems here too, right? Like, it's the cost of everything is out of control. Rents are out of control. House
Well,
prices.
let's get on to rents, because you were talking there a bit about renters' reforms. What can we expect from the Labour Party?
I'd love to tell you that I'm clear on what exactly they're going to do. I'm not. I don't know if that's intentional on their part or whether it's a slight miscommunication. There was a big bit of confusion because what was in their National Policy Forum document and what was in their manifesto on renters reform was not quite the same thing, which led a few people to think that they'd rode back on renters' rights.
Right.
I then spoke to Angela Rayner and Matthew Pennycook's team, and it was made clear to me that they have not backtracked on renters' rights. So I think we can expect what they've said, which is the immediate end of Section 21 evictions, which is really, really good. Just ban them. Just ban them. It's like a leading cause of homelessness.
Can I ask you about that, though? How would that ban work? Because I've heard arguments from both sides. Like, to me, it seems sensible that you would ban them. But then the other side of that is that you might create more instability with renting. Is that while you've still got Section 8?
Well, yes and no. Was it a landlord who said that to you by any chance?
Yeah, was it?
Oh my god, I'm shocked. Shocking. No, I don't think that's how it would work. But there are other reasons for instability, which we can get onto. But if you ban Section 21, you do make renting more secure, because what it means is that you can be evicted at any time without having to have done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. For instance, you might have complained about the fact that your oven doesn't work and your landlord evicts you, which happened to someone I know recently. But Section 8 will remain. But Section 8 grounds are really clear. So you have to be in quite serious rent arrears of 3 months or more. You, I think, would have to be guilty of antisocial behaviour. And I think those are basically the only grounds beyond the landlord needing the property back. Whether that could be exploited as a loophole, I think is an open question. In theory, could a landlord be like, well, I just need the property back and get someone out? Yes. But because Section 8 is tougher to get through court, I don't know if I see it working in the same way as Section 21.
Right. There were some really exciting proposals from Sadiq Khan when he was running for his third term as Mayor of London. He was talking about creating these hubs where you could go to and you could get free legal advice.
Yeah, great.
And he would advocate on your behalf. Well, he wouldn't personally, but the teams would advocate on your behalf. Do you think that that's one of the sticking points between renters and landlords, the sort of asymmetrical relationship that they have because they can't have access or don't have access to legal help at the moment?
Yes and no. Since legal aid has been cut, it is much, much harder to get housing advice. For instance, like, not all homeowners are rich. I know that's a controversial point, but there are lots of homeowners who are struggling now. Plenty of low-income people with mortgages, and they would not qualify for legal aid. And I think that's like a massive problem because mortgage arrears are rising.
Because they're homeowners, is that why?
So you wouldn't qualify for legal aid.
Wow.
That's why I was in Bradford. I was at the county court, and everybody I saw there was up for repossession because they were in like 3k worth of arrears, which I know is a lot of money, but it's not like let's take this person's home away amount of money.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, that's 2 months' rent if you're living in a big city.
Yeah, if you're in Manchester, Leeds, London, or even, you know, other places like Cornwall, other coastal towns for a one bed, that's 1.5 months' rent, depending on what kind of house you have.
Yeah.
But if you're a homeowner or you earn over a certain amount, you wouldn't qualify for legal aid. So I think if what Sadiq was talking about was expanding legal advice beyond people who have absolutely nothing, that's great, because we're in a situation where you have to be in really dire straits to access it. But what lots of people don't know is that if you show up at court, there are usually always duty housing advisors who will advise you for free and go into court with you and advocate on your behalf.
How do you know to get access to them, though? That's the problem. I'm just going to interrupt you briefly. I'm going to talk about Cramlington, which is declaring now. This is in Northumberland. Labour with 22,000, Reform just behind with 9,454, Green there with 2,144, Liberal Democrats not quite scraping 2,000, and then a couple of independents there, one with 500, one with 300. Just waiting on the Conservative vote. That looks like it's going to be a Labour. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Conservative there with 8,592 to Labour's 22,274. Labour hold.
But look at those reform numbers.
Well, I think that's what's extraordinary about all of this. I think it's mad. Again, nearly scraping 10,000. I don't think we've had a result yet where they're not scraping 10,000. That's extraordinary.
I think if the projections for how many seats they're going to have are correct, this is probably the real story.
Thank you, because I just said that to John Elledge and he said it wasn't.
Oh, really? Yeah. I'm sorry, John, I completely disagree. Why does he think it's not?
I stopped listening, honestly.
Well, he's wrong, obviously.
He actually said the story of the night is that Labour have won a historic landslide. And I was like,
but Labour are an established party. And this was something that we saw coming, that the polls saw coming. For a new party, Reform is a very new party, lest we forget, formerly the Brexit party, to get, let's say, if the exit polls are correct, 13 seats, that's massive.
I would agree.
And I think that is huge. And I think you have to acknowledge that our politics is going to the right, that we have a more presidential system. Nigel Farage is an enormous character. He has enormous pull. Reform's numbers, if they continue to have a larger vote share in constituencies than Conservatives, at a local level, they're the opposition.
I would agree with you. And I also think, when you compare it to, say, the Green Party, which is a long-established party, and you know exactly what you're voting... in principle, you know what you're voting for when you go for Green. Reform, because it's so new, that the lines are a bit more blurred, you'd think that the Greens should be picking up those sort of numbers.
Right, and they never have. And I think that's what's really key here. They never have. If those projections are correct, Reform will have more seats than the Greens have ever managed to get. I was actually talking to, I won't say who it was, because I think it's so easy to sneer at how people vote and why they vote the way that they do. But not everyone has the level of knowledge that you and I have. And I think...
Maybe you. I think you've overinflated me there.
No, that's not true. But we talk about this all the time, so we have some idea of what's going on, right? But some members of my extended family actually voted Reform today. They're all in their early 30s or younger, so like 33 or younger.
That's so interesting.
And I said to them, I was like, okay, no shade, but that's formerly the Brexit party, right? And they were like, no, we thought it was the Conservative party. I was like, that's not what it is. Why? Out of interest, no judgment. Like, why did you vote for them? Oh, because some local campaigners told us they were going to cut stamp duty so we'd be able to own homes.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think what Reform have done is run a very effective local campaign.
They've done that with a number of their policies, haven't they? I think that even though the tax policy that they have of raising that threshold to £20,000, even though in practice actually that won't benefit people who are on lower salaries, it looks extremely attractive. And it looks like, oh, hang on, I'm in for a bit of a windfall here. Also talking about nationalising, also talking about student loans in a way that none of the other major parties have spoken about.
And talking about raising the stamp duty threshold to 750k, which, by the way, would be a complete unadulterated disaster for the housing market. Well, this is my view, but I think Labour are right not to make stamp duty cheaper at this particular point in time.
Don't they want to bring it down to 300k?
I think long term we need complete reform of stamp duty and probably scrap it altogether and boost capital gains tax. But short term, with the housing market where it is, if you cut stamp duty, what you will do is recreate what Rishi Sunak did in the pandemic, which is basically create a temporary housing bubble. So people think, oh, I'm going to save 15k, 10k on my stamp duty. I can pay more.
Right. And people have already pushed up the value of their house.
So you end up inflating house prices.
Wow, okay.
So that saving on your stamp duty just gets whacked onto your mortgage. And of course, everyone's in a frenzy because they're like, oh, when's stamp duty going to change again? So people start outbidding each other. And that's what happened in 2020, 2021, 2022. And we ended up in an absolute clusterfuck of a situation where house prices were the highest they'd ever been in history. And then interest rates started rising.
Right.
And now the market is completely stuck. Yeah. But when Reform come up to you in the street and they're like, hey, we're going to cut tax so you can buy a house. If you don't know about the economics of the housing market, which let's face it, it's my job to know, but like most people don't, you're going to be like, yeah, that sounds great, have my vote. And that's how you end up with these kind of numbers.
What do you think about keeping, the Conservatives, it's 425, is that right, is the stamp duty threshold for them at the moment? Bringing it down to 300 with Labour, do you think that's a good idea?
I have mixed feelings about it, and this is when my politics and policy views are always tested. Will I benefit from it being increased? Would I benefit from what Reform was suggesting? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do I think it's good long term to do things that would inflate the housing market? No.
Right.
So I think Labour's move is actually sensible, but it would mean that there were more barriers to entry for the housing market, because you'd have to find stamp duty and a deposit, and it's just not realistic to think that house prices are going to crash.
I thought it was a bit of a cheap sneer at Rishi Sunak during one of the debates when he said he was talking about stamp duty being at 425,000, and there was sort of a lot of comment. The discourse online was, who's buying a £400,000 house as their first house? And it was quite a lot of people, actually.
People.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the average price across the country is what, like 285.
Yeah.
But that's not like a helpful figure, because if you actually look at the places where people live and work, it's much higher. So.
Especially now that you've got that bleed, am I right in saying that, from cities out into suburban areas?
Yeah, and there are really interesting constituencies around London where that's the case, like Hitchin and Harpenden. I think it's called something else now, but that's a really good example. Places where people who would have lived in London just cannot afford to anymore and are now moving out and commuting in. Milton Keynes also has the same problem. Well, maybe it's not a problem. It might be a good thing. I mean, people being redistributed across the country is good. It's also maybe partly why we're seeing the result that we're seeing this evening, right, as well. Labour actually maybe haven't done quite so well in urban areas as they've done in places that they weren't expecting to do well.
Gosh. Well, that's all to come, isn't it? Islington looks a bit testy as well, doesn't it?
I think it could be very testy.
Emily Thornberry fighting for her seat. She'll be quite comfortable.
I think she'll be okay.
But yeah, Jeremy Corbyn's still too close to call, apparently.
Yeah, I think that's expected. I think Jeremy Corbyn is one of those cult figures in British politics that people are very vocal in their support of, but the reality of whether the majority of people in Islington North are actually going to vote to keep him in or not is a very different picture, based on conversations I've had anyway.
Well, I was looking at the analytics for a bit of a dodgy site, but I mean, it looked all right.
Go on.
On some of the Green social posts and some of Jeremy Corbyn's social posts, and I was looking because the Greens do very well online. They can pick up quite comfortably 50,000 likes on a post. I know that sounds like I'm being a bit silly here, but I was looking at sort of where those likes were coming from, and actually not a lot of them do come from the UK, but they don't come from areas where you could have the possibility of electing a Green MP. And the same thing with Jeremy Corbyn. His were not coming from London. They were coming from all across the country. And you think, well, it's not concentrated enough, is it?
But I think that's a really important point, not silly at all. Actually,
just getting embedded in the likes, you know.
Getting into the likes, getting into the data. But that matters, right? I think social media matters. And Corbyn has an enormous national presence, international presence at this point, but he is still a contentious figure. And I don't think holding on to his seat is guaranteed. And if it were, I'm not sure that there would have had to be so many people out there campaigning for him.
Especially when you look at, say, Jamie Driscoll, who was the mayor for North Tyne, and he was a huge name up there. If anyone could win as an independent candidate, it could be someone like him.
Right.
And he didn't.
Yeah. And look at what happened to Andy Street as well.
Yeah.
Enormous figure who actually did a lot of good for the West Midlands. I don't think anything can be taken for granted.
Didn't Boris Johnson come out for him at the last minute?
He did, yeah.
I wonder which way that swung it.
Boris is doing a lot of last-minute appearances at the moment, which I think actually that's quite interesting, though, because, like, speaking about our politics becoming more presidential, Boris was the person that people voted for, right, in 2019. And, like, my mum is a die-hard Tory voter, and I think she wouldn't confirm to me that she didn't vote Tory today. I don't know what she voted. But I think them chopping and changing leader so much was the thing that did it for her. It's like they voted for Boris, people liked Boris, and then suddenly they ended up with Liz Truss and then Rishi Sunak, who, well, Liz Truss crashed the economy, which was pretty bad, and Rishi Sunak, for whatever reason, just couldn't communicate what he was trying to do to people. And I think Boris has this pull that the others just don't have.
So interesting, isn't it? It's like voting for the person rather than the party, because our system has meant that you can actually chop and change the leader because you voted for your local MP,
Yeah.
so it doesn't really matter who's leading.
But I do wonder whether the understanding of that is diminishing. Like, as our generation gets older, like I was talking to my sister about it today, and she was like, right, so I'm voting for my MP, not the Prime Minister. And I was like, well, you're actually voting for both. But because of other countries like America that are so important on the international stage, where you do vote for the president, I think that kind of presidential reality has transmuted here. And our debate system, call it a system, I think that's a bit generous, but the fact that we have these debates is quite a new thing. Like when I started working in political journalism, we didn't have them in the same way that we have now. How many were there this time? I lost count.
Well, do you remember at the beginning, Rishi Sunak had challenged Keir to doing a debate every single week, and Keir was like, absolutely not, I'm not going to have time for it. And then they ended up doing it every week anyway.
Basically.
So, a bit redundant, wasn't it? Yeah. Anyway, it's been a real joy speaking to you. Thank you so much. Sorry, I've kept you on so much longer than we said that we would. I'm so sorry. I was endlessly fascinated.